Week 16 of the fantasy football season with semifinals coming up. For fantasy owners, his wide receivers sit every matchup this week. Los Angeles Rams at the Seattle Seahawks. Puka Nacua, he's locked in weekly as a start, having a monster season, one of the best receivers in fantasy football. With Devontae Adams most likely out in this game, he's going to get more targets and more work, so he's a must-start. Tutu will he most likely benefit the most with Adams out of the lineup, but he's still someone I'm not going to trust 100% in a playoff game for fantasy owners. And this could be a tight, contested ball game, obviously, in division matchups. He's a JSN, Jackson Smith-Njigba start for the Seahawks, having a monster year. Seems like 100 and a touchdown pretty much weekly it is for him. I know this week it's a tougher matchup versus solid Ram defense for the most part, but he's a start. Cooper Kupp, Rashid Shaheed. Haven't seen much out of these guys all season long. They'll have a couple decent games here and there, but like I said, when it's crunch time now in the fantasy playoffs, these are players you're not going to trust where all season long they really haven't had the track record. Philadelphia Eagles at the Commanders, first of two ball games on Saturday night. A.J. Brown, 100 yards, 4 games in a row. He's putting up big numbers. Him and Jalen Hurts back on the same page. And this week in a great matchup at a bad Commander defense, sees a start. Devonta Smith to start as well. These two wide receivers, I think they're going to go out there and create damage in this ball game. And we know this Commander defense can't cover anyone, so they're easy starts. Terry McLaurin start this week. Terry McLaurin had a nice touchdown in last week's ball game, and he's been solid for the most part since he returned from the injury on and off all season. So Terry got paid in the offseason, and he's going out there making plays. And this week in a ball game where they're going to be trailing most likely early and often, I think he could put up decent numbers. Deebo Samuel, a fringe option. It's been an up and down season for Deebo Samuel, and we know he's not 100%, but he's been gutting it out this season is Deebo Samuel. With Marcus Mariota back there and quarterback, though, I don't think the upside's high for Samuel. He's a fringe option. Green Bay Packers at the Chicago Bears. NFC North Division matchup. Big ball game, no doubt about it. Christian Watson, if he plays, he's a start. Fortunately for Christian Watson, nothing major, and he's day-to-day right now with that shoulder and arm injury after he got landed on a deep ball down the middle of the field. So Watson, he's been the number one option, putting up big plays. And this week, if he's back in the lineup, he's a start. And Jaden Reed a start as well, where he was the number one wide receiver last season, and now he's come back. And he's already jumped over. He's already taken the playing time of Romeo Doubs and Matthew Golden. So they line him up in different formations. He's a gadget guy as well. At times, is Jaden Reed. And this week at the Bears, a start. Romeo Doubs, Matthew Golden. This hits for me in this ball game. They haven't done much all season long. I know Doubs had a couple good games here and there, but like I said, with Reed back in the lineup and Watson emerging the last month of the season, both these wide receivers don't have high ceilings. They're sits out of the Bears. Roma Dunze, I don't think he's going to play this week, but just in case if he's back out there for the Chicago Bear team, he's a start, is Roma Dunze. All season long, he's been the number one wide receiver. I know his numbers have been hit or miss at times this season, and that's to do with Caleb Williams as well, where he's been inconsistent. But if Dunze's back, even though they're taking a wait-and-see approach and careful with him right now, he's a start. DJ Moore, Luther Burden, a fringe option. DJ Moore, last week he found the end zone twice, but once again it was a fluky type of game where Moore's not really getting targeted much, and he's been a touchdown-dependent wide receiver. So no doubt about it, he went out there, he had a big game in last week's ball game, was DJ Moore, the Cleveland Browns. But this week versus the Packers, to me, he's a fringe option. Luther Burden day-to-day as well. He's banged up and not 100% with the ankle injury, and we'll see if he returns. But Burden was on his way to a good ball game versus the Browns last week, so they're both fringe options. Los Angeles Chargers at the Cowboys. Ladd McConkey a start. I know the numbers haven't been great over the last month of the season for the most part with Ladd McConkey, but this week a slam dunk matchup at the Dallas Cowboys. A defense that can't stop anyone. We saw the Vikings go out there and look like one of the better offenses in the league versus that defense. He's a start. Quentin Johnston, if he plays, he's a fringe option, and Keenan Allen as well. Just their numbers and targets have gone down over the last few weeks here for both these wide receivers. They're talented wide receivers, but this offense now with a two-headed backfield, the Hampton and Vidal, they're going to get production. Herbert also not 100%, where he's hurt that hand a few weeks ago, got surgery on it, but obviously he didn't miss a game with the left hand injury. But this week, even in a good matchup with the Cowboys, like I said, these guys the last couple weeks haven't done much at best. Their fringe option, CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, start this week. CeeDee Lamb, he's been locked in, and he didn't miss a game after a brutal concussion going back a few weeks ago in Week 14 versus the Lions. And Lamb came back with a game over 100 last week. So this week he's a start. And George Pickens, the last 2 games, we haven't seen much from him. But the thing is, last week's game, he wasn't targeted versus the Minnesota Vikings was Pickens. So this week in a matchup with the Chargers coming in, even though the Cowboys, their playoff hopes are done unless they run the table and the Eagles lose out. Obviously, I don't think it's happening. But Pickens, we'll see if he can get back on track this week. Minnesota Vikings at the New York Giants. Justin Jefferson, a couple opportunities in last week's game at Dallas, but a couple balls went through his hands, and him and McCarthy weren't on the same page. But this week at the Giants, I think he could go out there, and he's due for a bounce back. Weeks in a row now, he hasn't done much as Justin Jefferson, but this week at the Giants, I still will put him in the lineup. And Jordan Addison last week, a big play in that ball game. But these wide receivers have been inconsistent all season long, and that's with the carousel at quarterback. But the last 2 weeks, J.J. McCarthy's actually looked comfortable out there in the pocket. And this week, I would start both these wide receivers. So the Giants, Wendell Robinson to start each and every week. He's been a PPR, underrated player all season long, where we know underneath route running is his thing, and run yards after catch is his thing as well. And this week, versus a Minnesota Viking defense that's middle of the pack, he's a start. And Darius Slayton, just consistency and staying on the field has been a problem for him. So this week, Darius Slayton, I can't trust him. I know last week, 4 catches, 53 yards in that ball game. And obviously the Giants lost versus the Commanders. And Jackson Dart once again got concussed. And who knows if he's going to play, even though I'm leaning towards he's not this week. Cincinnati Bengals at the Miami Dolphins. Jamar Chase, what a season it's been for him once again. He was the first pick overall in fantasy drafts, and he's pretty much lived up to the bill, even with backup quarterbacks the majority of the season. So this week, in a good matchup at the Miami Dolphins, he's an easy start. T. Higgins, he would be a start as well for me. He's having a pretty decent season with 9 touchdowns on the year. I know the yards haven't been great, and injuries have been a problem coming off of concussions. If he's in the lineup as well, this is a good matchup versus a Miami defense that I don't think is any good, and he's a start this week. And out to the Dolphins, Jalen Waddle, he's a start. Jalen Waddle, I know the last couple weeks, it's one good game, one bad game type of deal for Jalen Waddle, but this week it's a good matchup versus Cincinnati Bengals. Last week, obviously, it was cold weather. Miami don't play good in cold weather, and now they're back home this week versus a bad Bengal defense. So Waddle, I think, bounces back in this one and is a start this week. New York Jets at the New Orleans Saints. I know this is a good matchup on paper for the New York Jets, but Adonai Mitchell, John Mechie in a semifinal game, I'm not going to trust these 2 wide receivers. I know Garrett Wilson, it's not looking good that he's going to return to the lineup this season for this New York Jet team. But like I said, Mitchell did find the end zone last week, and Mechie made a couple plays. It's a decent matchup in New Orleans, but it's Chris Olave a start. Found the end zone last week. It was a great victory for the New Orleans Saints, upsetting the Carolina Panthers. And now with the Vaughn Vayway in a sling and most likely not playing, Olave, even more targets here to come his way. And it's a good matchup versus the Jets, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Carolina Panthers. I actually like all 3 of these wide receivers, Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, Chris Godwin, in this ball game with the Carolina Panthers. Evans came back last week, and he put up some huge numbers and some highlight reel deep ball plays he made. So Baker, we know he's comfortable getting that ball down the field to Mike Evans. And this week at a team in the Panthers, he's had great success against. He's a starter. Emeka Egbuka, I know he's hit the rookie wall a little bit, but now with Evans back in the lineup, he's going to get back to that one-on-one coverage and find his opening. So this week in a good matchup at the Panthers, he's a starter. Chris Godwin has started as well last week, starting to find his foot in a little bit is Chris Godwin. He found the end zone, had a 2-point conversion as well. And like I said, this Panther defense, after what we saw last week, I thought they could have went out there and played better versus New Orleans. I think Tampa Bay could come in a big division matchup where first place is pretty much on the line in this one. And I like these 3 receivers. Tator McMillan, he's a start. I know McMillan, it's been up and down over the last couple weeks, but still for a rookie, he's been pretty consistent in an offense that isn't consistent with Bryce Young, the quarterback. And McMillan last week, a bad game, but this week it is a good matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers coming in. He really can't stop anyone. We've seen it over the last few weeks. And Jalen Coker, a fringe option, he's starting to come along over the last couple weeks. Is Jalen Coker. Last week, 4 catches, 60 yards, found the end zone. Another big wide receiver and a big target, and a guy could run the routes and has the matchup advantage on most corners. So this week, versus Tampa Bay is a fringe option. Buffalo Bills at the Cleveland Browns. Khalil Shakir, the number one option in this passing game for the Buffalo Bills. And no one else at the wide receiver position has done nothing all season long for this Bill team. So this week, in a matchup with the Browns, where I thought their defense was playing good until the last couple weeks here, I think Shakir could go out there and have a good game. Joshua Palmer, Gabe Davis, Brandon Cooks, all sits for me. Like I said, number 2 wide receiver hasn't stepped up all season long for this Buffalo Bill team, and obviously been a consistent option. So this week, there sits now to the Browns, Jerry Jeudy, Isaiah Bond, the sits. You haven't trusted a Brown wide receiver all season long. And Jeudy, I know last season he went out there, put up some big numbers, obviously over 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns, but this season he hasn't done it. And this week he's a sit. And Isaiah Bond, last week he had 2 catches, 89 yards in that ball game. It was Isaiah Bond, but this week to me, he's a sit. We have to see way more out of him. And in Shedeur Sanders, this is going to be a tougher matchup with a veteran defense of the Bills coming in, where it could be trouble for these receivers to do much. Vegas Raiders at the Houston Texans. Trey Tucker, Tyler Lockett, they're both sits. Lockett got banged up in last week's game, left with injury. And this whole offense is inconsistent. Even Brock Bowers, we've seen one good game, one bad game pattern. And if Kenny Pickett's back in there, quarterback, definitely in a matchup versus one of the best defenses in the league, you can't trust these receivers. Nico Collins, he's a start each and every week. Last week, a big game for Nico Collins. Over 80 yards. He found the end zone twice, and he started off the ball game with a 57-yard touchdown. And then he didn't do much till the end of the ball game. But this week versus a bad rated D, he's a start. And Jaden Higgins, a fringe option. Last week, it was a non-existent ball game for Jaden Higgins. We know he's a talented wide receiver, but this ball game versus the Raiders is a better matchup, obviously, than Arizona, even though Arizona's defense isn't any good. And I think Higgins could bounce back, but at best, he's a fringe option as well. Atlanta Falcons at the Arizona Cardinals. Drake London, there's good optimism that he plays in this ball game from the Atlanta Falcons. They're hopeful he plays in this one. So if he plays, obviously, they're missing him big time in this offense, even though they pulled up off the upset victory at Tampa Bay, led by Kyle Pitts. But London, if he plays, he's a stud wide receiver. He's a start. Darnell Mooney, David Sills, the 5th. This sits in this one. I know Sills last week, 10 targets, dropped a couple passes, including a touchdown. But he's actually gone out there and made plays. And with Darnell Mooney, it's been a down season and a season not to remember for Darnell Mooney. He hasn't done much. And obviously, even in a good matchup, both these wide receivers in this spot, you can't trust them at Arizona. Marvin Harrison, we'll see if he comes back. He's missed the last 3 out of 4 ball games for this Arizona Cardinal team. But Michael Wilson, it's definitely paid dividends for him, with pretty much 15 or more fantasy minimum for Michael Wilson when Harrison's been out of the lineup. So this week, in a pretty good matchup with the Falcons coming in, and Jacoby Brissett and Wilson on the same page and making big plays, he will be an easy start. Kansas City Chiefs at the Tennessee Titans. No Mahomes out for the season, torn ACL. Gardner Minshew next man up. And Minshew, we know he's a gunslinger. He's going to turn that football over at times, but also he's going to make some big plays here and there. So this week, I actually like Rashee Rice with Minshew in there, and also it's a great matchup for the Titans. And Xavier Worthy, haven't seen anything all season long with him and Mahomes in the lineup. And I don't think all of a sudden now, with Minshew in the lineup, he's going to go out there and get more deep ball opportunities and make more plays. Even in a good matchup at the Titans, he's a sit. Elway, Omena, Tremere, DK, you're not going to start any of these Tennessee Titan wide receivers. They're tough to trust. And this is one of the worst offenses in the league. So this week versus a good Chief defense, this Pittsburgh Steelers at the Detroit Lions. DK Metcalf a start. Last week, what a touchdown it was for Metcalf. Caught a ball in the middle of the field, and he broke 3 or 4 tackles and muscled in to the end zone. So pretty much he's the only option in that passing game that's consistent, even though his numbers this season have been up and down here for DK Metcalf. But like I said, this week it's going to be a high-scoring game most likely. They know they got to put points on the board, and Metcalf is the best player to go through, in my opinion, for Pittsburgh to go out there and put points on the board in the passing game. Now to the Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown, what a game last week. He went off with a huge ball game, over 150 yards, and he found the end zone twice. So this week, I think he's going to have no problem once again as St. Brown. He's been a stud receiver once again this year, and this week an easy matchup. Jameson Williams to start. And ever since Laporta went down and Dan Campbell took over the play call with Jameson Williams, he's been one of the better wide receivers in all fantasy football. So this week, he's another wide out. Him and Goff are locked in. He found the end zone last week at the Rams. And this week versus Steelers, he's a start. Jacksonville Jaguars At the Denver Broncos, Jacoby Myers is start. He's been the number one option in this passing game since they traded for him at the NFL trade deadline. He could run all the routes. Him and Trevor Lawrence are locked in. And this week, even in a tougher matchup on paper at the Denver Broncos, he's a start. Brian Thomas Jr. is start as well. The last couple of weeks, he's starting to get things going after he struggled all season long with injuries, drop passes, and underperformance. And Thomas Jr. found the end zone last week. I know it was versus the New York Jets. But this week here, I think Jacksonville knows they got to put points up on the board because this Denver offense is playing good, and also the defense is going out there, obviously, and been a good unit all season long. So the Broncos, Courtland Sutton to start. Big game last week for Courtland Sutton. Easily the number one option in the passing game for Bo Nix in this offense. And Sutton, I know he had a couple down games here and there, but more times than not, he's going to be a consistent wide receiver. And this week, versus a mediocre Jaguar defense, he's a start. Troy Franklin, a fringe option. Last week he had a big game, was Troy Franklin, but he's another wide receiver and consistent. I know it's only his second year in the league is Troy Franklin, and this offense likes running the football a lot and getting Courtland Sutton the ball, and we know Bo Nix likes running as well. So this week, Franklin, even in a decent matchup and coming off of big games, a fringe option. New England Patriots at the Ravens Sunday night, Stephon Diggs is a start. I know he's been inconsistent over the last few weeks is Stephon Diggs, where he's had some big games and then some games where he didn't do much. Like, I thought he would go out there versus his former team last week in the Buffalo Bills and have a big game like he did early in the season, but obviously that wasn't the case. But this week at Baltimore, I still would start him. Kayshon Boutte, Demario Douglas, the sits. These guys are pretty much deep ball threats or touchdown or nothing type of threats in terms of fantasy football. So this week in the semifinals, you're not going to be playing them. Zay Flowers a start. Number one option in the passing game, pretty much the only consistent option in the passing game, even though he's had his stinkers as well, where we know this offense runs through Lamar running the football and Derrick Henry. But Flowers this week versus the Pats, where they got to drive that football down the field and try to make big plays, is a start. And Rashad Bateman, he really hasn't been a factor this season, so he's a sit, is Rashad Bateman, where last year he was pretty decent, but this season, like I said, he hasn't been a fantasy option. And now Monday night, San Francisco 49ers at the Indianapolis Colts. Jawan Jennings, he's a start. He's having a good year. Jawan Jennings, number two option in the passing game and number one wide receiver on this roster. And he wants a big contract, and that's why he's going out there and performing with that extra motivation. Ricky Pearsall, a fringe option, and also now he's banged up, and then the injury more serious than they thought is the San Francisco 49er team. So we'll see if Pearsall plays in this game, because last week he finally had a decent ball game where he's missed majority of the season with injuries. So this week, if he does play, he'd be a fringe option. And out to the Colts, Michael Pittman, the only guy I really could trust on this offense with Phillip Rivers in their quarterback. I know Josh Downs found the end zone last week. Alec Pierce, he made a key play late in that ball game. But like I said, this offense, a lot of dink and dunk. It's going to be quick slants, quick outs, screen passes, nothing more than that. And I think if it's one wide receiver that'll have a good game, it'll be Michael Pittman. And that Alec Pierce, Josh Downs is sits. Like I said, Pierce made a nice play. He didn't do much, and Downs found the end zone. But like I said, Josh Downs really hasn't done much. So this week here, both these wide receivers are sits for me in this one. So that's wide receiver starts in every matchup for week 16 of the fantasy football season.